Hello and welcome to Game 11 in the 2024 World Chess Championship. So let's find out what happened today. An exciting game. It had been all tied after 10 games, and there are only 4 left. So in this game, we have Gukesh Damaraju, the 18-year-old challenger from India with the white pieces, and he plays knight to f3, the ready opening. And so the world chess champion Ding Liren, 32 years old, from China, he responds with d5 here, taking a share of the center. And immediately we have an attack on this central pawn with c4 here. So the ready gambit. Pretty interesting here. If black captures this pawn, it will pull a more valuable central pawn from the center of the board. So let's see what happens. The world champion pushes forward. Now, generally, you don't want to move a piece twice in the opening or a pawn unless you have a good reason. And here he gains space in the center. And the queen is protecting this pawn from the knight. And also now this pawn prevents this knight from jumping in here to c2. So let's see what happens. Well, now we have b4 being played. This is the ready gambit declined advance variation. So advancing this pawn, gaining space on the queen side, perhaps allowing this bishop to develop on b2, aiming at this pawn that's only protected by the queen. And the game continues with c5 being played, fortifying the pawn, asking the young challenger if he wants to go ahead and capture here. So let's see what happens. Instead of dealing with this, we have e3 being played, putting even more pressure on this pawn, allowing the bishop here, this light squared bishop, to develop. And so the game continues with piece development by the world champion, bringing this knight out to f6, helping cover squares in the center. So the game continues with a3, fortifying this pawn that was unprotected. And so now the game continues with a mistake by the world champion, bishop to g4. This swings the game into white's favor here. It looks like queen to c7 would have been a better move according to the computer, but this move does pin the knight to the queen, and of course that knight is helping put pressure on the pawn in the center. So let's see what happens here. We have a capture in the center, the best move in the position, and so now pawn recaptures towards the center, and the game continues with h3, putting the question to this bishop of whether it will capture, giving up the bishop pair, or retreating. So let's see what the world champion decides. He decides to give up his bishop pair, and generally you don't want to do that, especially if the board is kind of open. Although, we don't know yet how the center of the board will end up, although this pawn is already gone here on the e file, so that's half open. And the queen recaptures. So this move, if we go back here, it looks like it was best according to the computer. White is still ahead here. After the recapture, the queen is developed. Black has a knight developed. So the world champion develops his queen, and now black, after white moves here, a pawn is moved to help fortify and protect this pawn that the queen was attacking. But now black is ahead in development here, and the best move is found, a5, and now white only has a slight edge after this. a5 gains space, attacks this pawn. So if this pawn is captured, this pawn would not want to recapture, because then the rook could be picked off here. So the game continues with a pawn push, an inaccuracy, swinging the advantage to slightly in black's favor. Now, apparently, it would have been better to just go ahead and capture this pawn instead of pushing forward. But this does gain space. It prevents the knight from jumping forward, although the knight will probably end up going here anyway. So the game continues with the knight developing, and now we have a pawn push to g3, which will probably allow this bishop to fianchetto and white's king to castle to safety. So the game continues with knight jumping forward, threatening a possible fork here of bishop and rook. So how will Gukesh deal with that? Well, he ignores that. Ignores that move. A great move here. It looks like that was the best move in the position. Fianchetto, creating a battery here. So if this knight jumps forward, there's a possibility of capturing this pawn here in the future. Let's see what happens. So we have a knight retreat here. So the knight retreats back, possibly with the idea of pushing forward, maybe bringing the other knight in here, or even attacking the queen here. So the game continues with white castling to safety, the best move in the position. The king is safer here, and the rook is moved towards the center, where it could possibly move here and line up on the king on this half open file. All right, we have a knight jumping forward, an attack on the queen here. So the game continues with queen to f4, the best move in the position, because the knight, it cannot capture here, or the queen will be picked off. So, let's see what the world champion does here. And at this moment, the world champion with black pieces here is ahead. So rook centralizes, the best move in the position, helping protect this unprotected pawn that the queen is lining up on. So we have a inaccuracy being played, and now the world champion is ahead by the equivalent of 3/4 of a pawn's worth of material. This inaccurate rook move, it is protecting the pawn, but if we have a capture, okay, it does work, because if this if this knight captures the pawn, the rook can recapture here, because if this knight moves, then the queen will be picked off. So knight to d2 apparently would have been a better move in this position, because if the knight moves here, it would cover this square, preventing this possible check, which would allow a capture of this rook here. So the game continues with a mistake by the world champion. So kind of a hectic game here. What is that? The second mistake by the world champion. We've had inaccuracies. So a more exciting game today. Now we have g6 being played with the idea of possibly fianchettoing here and getting this king castled to safety, activating the rook in the corner, which is not doing anything at the moment. So pawn is pushed forward, fortifying this pawn on b5. Perhaps allowing the bishop to develop here, line up on the knight, and this pawn perhaps. So the game continues with h5 being played here, an inaccuracy. Apparently queen to b8 would have been better, because then the queen would be protected by the rook, and this threat, this would no longer be a threat of the the queen lined up on black's queen, pinning this knight here. So here we have a threat of bishop developing and attacking the queen, But because of this battery here, the queen could capture, giving up queen for rook and bishop, but that would still not be the best trade. So the game continues with a counterattack. So this threat is ignored in favor of a counterattack on black's unprotected queen. The computer still recommends bishop to a3, developing the bishop. And instead, we have an attack on the queen. The pawn is refused, so the world champion decides not to go after this pawn, which could open up lines, possibly open up this b file. So the best move is found by Ding Liren. He just centralizes his queen a little bit here, and the game continues with finally this bishop to a3 move found. But now we have an attack on the queen, and the knight is pinned to the queen. A common strategy that's occurred throughout this World Chess Championship is lining up the less valuable pieces on more valuable pieces, such as this bishop lining up on the queen, even though there are pieces in between. So it does immobilize this knight, otherwise the queen would be picked off. So the game continues with finally this attack is directed towards white's queen, and instead we have a counterattack, picking off a knight, counterattacking black's queen. And so the game continues with queen captures, and now we have this threat that white must deal with. So he sidesteps out of the line of fire, centralizes his queen, and once again that theme of lining up on the more valuable pieces. So the king is potentially under fire. If this knight would move out of the way, maybe a rook would develop here. But at the moment, this pawn is also being threatened here. So the world champion blocks the threat to the pawn, blocking with the knight. And now we have knight developing, getting off the back rank. The rooks are connected, and the knight will have a possibility of jumping onto this fine outpost on b5, which cannot be, from there the knight could not be chased away by any pawns. Only a piece would be able to do that. And so the game continues with rook pressing forward. This is an inaccuracy. Apparently it would have been better to castle immediately here. But the rook steps forward, protecting this pawn, freeing the knight from blocking duty here. And then the knight would be able to jump onto this outpost. So the game continues with the knight dropping back, preventing the knight or discouraging the knight from pressing forward, as now it would be captured here on the outpost. And so the game continues with the queen picking off this pawn. And so now the world champion is ahead here. He's ahead, according to the computer, by the equivalent of a little over half a pawn, even though he is ahead one pawn in material. So the game continues with an attack on the queen. The rook grabs the half-open file, and the game continues with a queen retreat to c7. It appears that queen to d8 would have been a little bit better, maybe. And so now the rook presses forward, applying a little bit of pressure on this pawn, although the knight is covering that at the moment. And so now the game continues with king castling, and white is ahead at this moment by plus 0.67. So the knight drops back. This is a mistake. And now the edge has swung back in black's favor. Black has a slight edge after this move. Generally, you don't want to place a knight on the edge of the board, and then here on the back rank, that's not so great either. So let's see what Gukesh has in mind. Well, the opponent plays an inaccuracy, and the game swings back in white's favor. So here we have rook to b8, helping to fortify this pawn. The knight repositions the best move here, knight up to b3, applying some pressure to this pawn, putting more pressure on this pawn as well. And so the game continues with a mistake, swinging the game to +1 in white's favor, even though white is ahead, or excuse me, even though black is ahead by a pawn. So apparently e5 would have been a better move, helping fortify this pawn in the center. But the game continues with the best move being found. The knight jumps forward, attacking the rook. And then we have a rook sidestep here, lining up on the queen. Once again, that theme of lining up on the more valuable pieces. So the game continues with rooks doubling on the half-open b file, putting pressure on this pawn along with the knight. And so the computer says this was an inaccuracy, that it would have been better to immediately capture here on b7 with the knight. So the game continues with a blunder being played by the world champion. And it looks like this is a game-losing blunder here if the young challenger finds the best way to take advantage. And it looks like knight to b4 should have been played to go ahead and block the battery of these rooks, to kind of take away their coordination. And now the rooks can't protect one another, and it kind of blocks the attack on this b7 pawn. That would have been the best move. And then here, once again, it looks like knight takes b7 would have been best. So we could take a quick look at that. Knight captures on b7 would have been best. And then what? It looks like well, you wouldn't want to capture with the rook, because now we have all these pieces lining up on that pawn. And I guess this pressure building up here was too much for the world champion. It looks like the best move would be bishop to f8. But then, let's see, rook to a1. Huh. That's interesting. So rook to a1 would be best according to the computer. Another possibility is c5, pressing this pawn forward, or even rook to b3. So different options here. But if the game had played out like this, it would have been still a slight edge for white. But in the game, we had this blunder, this game-losing blunder, and the young challenger, Gukesh, finds the best move in the position. Attacking, capturing the piece here. So if we go back and look at this, he captures the knight. The pawn cannot recapture, and that's the best move in the position. So this is where the game ended. After this move, the world champion must have resigned here because let's see what could have happened. Well, the best move would have been to go ahead and capture here. But then you have rook captures rook and pins the queen to the king. Another example of a less valuable piece lining up on two more valuable pieces, pinning the queen to the king. So here it looks like best would be this rook move. And now the computer's saying it might even be better to retreat the queen back to here. But either way, rook will capture, rook recaptures, and at this point, white would be ahead by +2 as far as material here. And then the computer says almost plus 4.5 is the estimation of how far ahead white is ahead. So, yeah, the world champion did not play on in this losing position and resigned. So, feel free to leave comments. Let me know what you think. What happened here? The pressure, I guess, just built up on the world champion. And then he cracked under pressure, it looks like. So, good game by Gukesh here. Let me take a look at the accuracy rating. So, it looks like the game was pretty even. It kind of went up and down a slight bit until the end here, where white, built up an advantage until he broke through. 95.7% accuracy by Gukesh and 88.4% by the world champion Ding. And Gukesh had 5 great moves, 1 mistake, but the world champion had 3 mistakes and 1 blunder. So it looks like Gukesh played at a 2950 rating level and the world champion played at a 2600 rating level, which you might not be able to see that. It's underneath my image here. The opening was played with 98.5% accuracy for Gukesh and 95.3% accuracy for Ding Liren. So perhaps he was surprised by the young challenger's opening choice in this game. 94.8% accuracy in the middle game for Gukesh and 86.1%. So the world champion struggled in this game. Perhaps he was surprised by this opening choice. We have 3 more games to go, so I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens next. Will the world champion be able to come back and tie things up? Let's find out. Stay tuned tomorrow for game number 12. And then after that, there will be a rest day before the next game. So, once again, feel free to leave any comments. Let me know what you think. I'm always glad to hear from viewers and subscribers. Also, like and subscribe if you haven't already to support the channel. Thank you for watching and have a super chess day.